Indeed, if we were to go around the room and ask how many people believe in free will and how many don't, that it would be about 98% that believe in free will. And yet I've just said that free will doesn't exist. Indeed, I think the idea is unintelligible. It not only doesn't exist, it's totally unintelligible. But it's a very complex set of arguments associated with that. And I think coming from whatever background you come from, to take the attitude you did in your statement in question, that you do well to stick with what you've got.
My background is murder and rape.
Well,
and I once thought that that was okay because who cared about life? But there are absolutes now. Life does matter.
I suppose we could take a test of that. You could remove from people the belief that there's an ultimate foundation in ethics and then just see if they go morally berserk. I know an awful lot of people who do not believe in ultimate foundations for ethics, and they're among the most reasonable and social and ethical people that I know.
It strikes me, Professor Johnson, that your argument is not with evolution or with Darwinism, but with the presumption of metaphysical naturalism as opposed to metaphysical theism. Mm-hmm. Now, we've seen this wonderful high-tech slideshow that Provine has, and metaphysical naturalism has also given us the cure for many diseases. It's put a man on the moon. It leveled Hiroshima. It's given us the technique of open debate we're engaged in now. My question to you is, what has metaphysical theism, as you call it, ever succeeded in accomplishing other than to enrich and empower its proponents at the expense of the poor, the uneducated, and the easily and willingly misled?
The notion that American democracy, for example, and tolerance is the fruit of metaphysical naturalism, as if it was invented by Darwinism, is just, that's absurd.
Would you like to debate me on that on a separate day? What
metaphysical theism has given us is the notion that the human being has great dignity and importance because it's created in the image of God, and that equality has a real metaphysical meaning because human beings are equal in the sight of their Maker. That's what our own constitutional order is founded upon from its earliest documents.
That the greatest crimes in history have been committed in the name of God, not metaphysical naturalism.
You say that at the end of the 20th century, the century of scientific atheism, the century in which the consequences of the makers of the 20th century, the atheistic materialists, has been worked out in its world wars, in its wars of extermination, in which we had the Marxist version of totalitarianism, in which we had the German version of militaristic totalitarianism. These are not crimes of theism. However, now let me speak about the particularly scientific consequence. Because our minds are created in the image of the Maker of the entire universe, we have a reason for confidence in our own rationality, that we can, up to a point, understand how things are made, how they're put together, and use them. That's why technology is completely consistent with, and indeed well-founded upon, a theistic perspective.
Can you give me one technological device that's developed out of the Bible or anything else?
Metaphysical naturalism is a faith that everything can be explained in terms of purposeless material processes, including the mind, as Will Provine will say, leading to the conclusion that our thoughts are the products of firing synapses or biochemical reactions, and in the end, that's the end of rationality. It loses its own metaphysical basis.
Okay, Professor Provine.
I just have a very quick comment in relation to that. It is the absolute understanding that a person is totally and completely and absolutely correct, which has led to a lot of the intolerance of Christianity.
We will now alternate, so we'll have a question for Professor Provine and then Professor Johnson. To my left, anybody?
I'd like to know, because the thrust of his argument seemed to suggest that he would favor teaching creationism in schools on an equal footing with what's called evolutionary theory. Since creationism is a theory without a methodology and without any way of correcting itself in the face of the evidence, presumably he would also wish that other creation myths, such as Sumerian and Egyptian and Buddhist myths are taught on the same basis, since they are also simply stories without any methodology to correct them, without any investigative methodology.
What my position is, I don't put it as saying creationism should be taught, because I think that rouses a whole lot of stereotypes and misunderstandings. What we should start doing is teaching science honestly. That is to say, one should teach not only the confirming examples that can be found, but the disconfirming evidence. One should enable the students of this subject in the schools to see that Cambrian explosion, for example, as it really is, to understand the counter-arguments to the claim that artificial selection is valid evidence of the ability to create entirely new types of organisms by undirected and purposeless processes. That is to say, I want an honest and appropriately skeptical attitude taken towards the dogmatic claims of biological evolution. Now, I really want this done not so much in the public schools. I mean, I do want it done in the high schools. But what I really want it done is in the universities. That is to say, I want to open up the scientific world itself, which is largely ruled by fear on this issue. Fear of getting on the wrong side of your colleagues, fear of losing your standing because you challenge the ruling materialism and metaphysical naturalism. Now, once that happens, I'm confident there'll be big changes in the science. There'll be a scientific revolution, and then that will filter down to the secondary schools. But I don't believe in starting by having a big debate over the metaphysical issues and so on before high school students. That's not where the debate has to happen.
Let me say one word, too.
Right.
I really, genuinely agree with Phil on this issue. We need to have more discussion in the university communities. I start my course on evolution with the students reading Phil's book. Then he comes and visits, and it does more to turn my students into evolutionists than anything else.
Okay, well
So
then...
I like open debate.
Right, well then my question becomes, again to Dr. Johnson, even in the face of uncertainties with regard to evolutionary theory, and every theory has its uncertainties, why should that drive us into the arms of any one particular creation myth any more than any other one?
Where my argument goes is to this, and where I think biology is going to go in the next century, is that when you are willing to look the facts of biology, the organisms as they are, when you aren't blinded by a materialist ideology, you will see that it is the information which has to be explained, and the information is a kind of intelligence encoded in biochemistry, an intelligence that cannot be reduced. I'm not sure, I think I heard something that sounded an awful lot like agreement with this a moment ago from Will, that can't be just reduced to the laws of physics and chemistry. It's something additional that's there. And the project for science will be to figure out how it all works, how it puts together all the mechanisms, how to interpret it. Now, the reason why that approach isn't taken, I think, is because it suggests the existence of something outside of science, which is the source of that information, and that's unacceptable. When you hear the language that the molecular biologists use, they talk, about the information which is stored in libraries of DNA and which is transposed and coded and decoded and translated. They use all the language of intelligent communication, but they run away from the metaphysics. Now, it's not a matter of speculating about myths and so on. It's a matter of looking at what's there and not being afraid to see it, because it leads you to disturbing conclusions about other things.
Okay, well then, again, what I'd say is, why does the evidence...
You had your shot.
Okay.
Question for Professor Provine.
No, I have a question for Johnson.
Yeah, we're going to be alternating. This is a design, not...
Could I speak to Dr. Provine? Because I'm afraid that all the questions to one speaker come from one side and then from the other.
Yeah.
So I think I was next. My question to Dr. Provine is, with your permission, moderator. Okay.
I didn't hear what he said.
My question to Professor Provine is, you've mentioned evolution from pre-existing species, and I would wonder how science would explain the creation of the first species. Because it seems to me that if you take, the building blocks, let's say, 20 amino acids and 4 base pairs and some lipids and things, if you built everything together and molded it to be exactly what a paramecium is, would it still necessarily be alive? Do you follow what I'm saying? There seems like there's something more.
I follow what you're saying. You're asking where did the first life come from, and you're suggesting that the first life was like a paramecium.
No, I'm saying, what was the first life? What was the first thing that was alive? How do you
Gosh, you know, I wasn't there at the time, but let me really try and address what you're asking. You want to know how there could be a naturalistic evolution of life on Earth. 15 years ago, it looked like there was not a good answer to that. Because DNA-based life requires all kinds of enzymes, both for replication of the DNA and turning DNA into proteins. And it did not appear that all that system could have been available in time for the DNA-based life to evolve and everything to work. At the time that we thought DNA-based life had to have evolved from inanimate matter, a number of very prominent prebiotic biologists, including Francis Crick for a while, argued that the first life must have come to Earth from outer space because they felt very frustrated. But since that time, we've discovered that RNA can, in fact, through reverse transcriptase, turn back into DNA. And now there are very plausible scenarios for the evolution of RNA-based life, particularly nice because RNA can both catalyze itself and replicate itself and turn into protein. I just heard a scenario presented at a molecular evolution in Costa Rica of a young man who was arguing for a particular scenario, admittedly very theoretical, but plausible nevertheless, for the transference of RNA life into DNA life. It's a really exciting time on the origin of life issue, and you're asking your question at just the right time. There are a lot of people on this campus that could give you some really detailed information and answers to your questions.
But let me perhaps clarify. Even in the RNA world scenario, there's still at some point this living thing that has this code, and it evolved from no code, and I'm trying to see where what's the connection there?
That's exactly the issue that terribly interests evolutionary biologists, and that's what I'm telling you is a real good hot issue right now. Evolutionists are thinking a lot about that question. I don't know exactly how RNA evolved in the first place, but as I say, it's a real lively field of evolutionary biology right now.
Thank you.
I'll just comment that these scenarios seem plausible to those that are already convinced of the basic naturalistic scenario. They change all the time. You get proteins first in one time, and then it's RNA. In fact, the comments from leading people in the field have often indicated that there's an amazing failure of any experimental success. You have mutually inconsistent paradigms fighting each other, the field is still at almost a pre-paradigmatic stage. Now, one of my most distinguished colleagues at Berkeley, a very famous molecular biologist I won't name, said to me once, he said, "Phil," he says, "I read your book. And it seems, I'm convinced that Darwinian evolution is okay up from the cell," he says, the cell on up, "but you can't get a cell that way. I know that." And I said to my friend, "Well, X, do you realize that the cell is the only thing you know about?" That is to say that he had studied professionally. These scenarios seem plausible if you already buy the philosophical necessity.
Okay, we're back to Professor Johnson.
Professor Johnson, I think you do a good job proving that there's holes in evolutionary theory, questions that are still being asked, and dissent that's still happening among far-looking researchers. However, a lot of the researchers that you're probably citing have faith that the answers to these questions lie in the evolutionary theory in areas that Darwin may not have seen, but still see the answers as lying along that track. Why do your questions, why do the holes that you state go to prove any alternative evolutionary theory more than, how do they at all support creationism as opposed to a revisionist evolutionary theory?
She's asking you to fill in the blank of the mechanism of evolution.
Well, why should I even be interested in doing that? What you're asking is for me to join the other side and become a promoter of some half-baked naturalistic scenario for the history of life. Whereas my whole point is to tell you that these are half-baked scenarios and I don't believe any of them. See, this idea, you're supposed to promote a naturalistic alternative and be in our business, otherwise you have no standing. That's what keeps this system from crumbling of its own accord, is because of rules like that. And then it's promoted to the public as the creation story that everybody's supposed to believe and found their ethics on. Why should we?
But you state that there's a lack of empiricism in evolutionary theory, that there's some, there are questions left, questions that still need to be answered and stuff like that, but you don't have any empirical evidence that creationism is true.
Yeah, well, what do we mean by creationism? There's loads of empirical evidence that there is, sure. Richard Dawkins begins his book, The Blind Watchmaker, the most vociferous argument for atheism in the guise of biology that you can find, by saying that biology is the study of extremely complicated things that look as if they were designed by a creator for a purpose. And in particularly, he goes on to concede that even a single cell contains genetic information that exceeds the information content of all the volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica put together, or a CD-ROM, or whatever you want to say. Now, then he says that's an illusion because we know that mutation and selection can do the whole job. But if you look at the evidence and you see how much that's just assumption and presumption, and it's downright against the evidence of the fossil record, and it isn't established anywhere, then you realize you're back to square one. In the words of Richard Dawkins, biology is the study of extremely complicated things that appear to have been designed by a creator for a purpose.
Would you like to?
The answer to your question, in other words, is that the Creator did it.
I was just curious on what both of you believe that you're made up of. I mean, do you believe that you have souls, or do you believe that you are not spiritual beings, or I just wondered what you thought you are.
Should I answer that what I think Will is, or what I think I am? Just teasing, Will. I want to answer it for organisms rather than for even just human beings. I think that this is that one of the delusions that biology's been led into from this 19th century science that Will defends so vigorously is the notion that what life is it's matter evolving by chance and natural selection. So the thing is, it's the material. It's a Kornberg's error, too, that it's the biochemistry makes it. I don't think that that's the case. I think that what makes life life is the information. Just in the way, the analogy here is to a book. If I have the plays of Shakespeare here, or even a more modest contribution like Darwin on Trial, you cannot understand you don't know anything about the book or the meaning of it from studying the laws of paper and ink. You know, you can learn all there is to know about paper and ink, and you still know nothing about the information content. It's something that's different and that's separate. The information that makes the whole thing work. And of course, you can put the book on computer disk or memorize it, and the information is still the same, although the medium is totally different. My own belief is that that's true of organisms, that it's the information, which is the intelligence, which is encoded in them, that will have to be understood separately from the biochemistry.
For myself, the answer is much simpler. I don't have any kind of soul. My brain is a physicochemical bundle of material stuff, and when it ceases to have its blood supply, my consciousness and my awareness will disappear, and I will never be conscious again at that point. I'll just die, and I'll just rot, and that'll be the end of it.
Professor Provine's question? A question over here for Professor Provine.
No, nobody wants to ask Provine anymore?
Can you come forward if you have a question for Professor Provine?
Professor Provine. This is purely a question of evidence. Professor Johnson brought up the fossil record and how we're not finding the columns coming together. And I've heard repeatedly, or it's been brought up repeatedly, about the Archaeopteryx and how that shows the combination of bird and reptile. But I'm curious, is there some reason that you have for the fossil record not being that more diverse and more like interrelated species?
There's very good reasons why the fossil record is not so hot. If you look at the ocean floor, for example, every bit of the ocean floor is newer than 200 million years old. That's because it's been subducted. It's just gone under continents or under other plates and it's gone. So you can't look in the ocean floor and get back beyond 200 million years. All those fossils put there are gone. There are lots of reasons why fossils that are laid down would disappear in time from any kind of access to human beings. Secondly, fossils are only laid down under very special kinds of circumstances. Darwin was keenly interested in that, but modern evolutionists have a whole science of how fossils are made, and it takes very special circumstances indeed. But the fossil record is not very bad throughout. It's quite good in very many areas. For example, if you're interested in the evolution of cichlid fish in the rift lakes in the United States, let's say along the existing eastern seaboard, you can get year by year by year evidence of the fossils that are there. You can watch in front of your eyes over tens of thousands of years new species of cichlids coming into existence. I have a colleague who does that. So the fossil record has all kinds of gaps and everything in it, but it's not uniformly bad. And if you happen to be interested in the relationship of living forms to their relatively recent fossil ancestors, there's all kinds of fossil evidence of those. You notice that Phil talks about mostly fossil evidence that's hundreds of millions of years old.
I might just add in comment on that, that is the standard old-style Darwinian response to the fossil record problem. It comes from the origin of species itself. The fossil record is incomplete. But there are lots of prominent fossil experts today that no longer buy that. These include the punctuationalists, Gould, Eldridge, and Stanley, and especially James Valentine, very distinguished professor from UC Santa Barbara who moved to Berkeley. And we've seen interviews with him on the Cambrian record and so on. And there just isn't any good reason for that whole universe of fossils to be absent when, for example, they're claiming fossil evidence of primitive life, of bacterial, of cellular life, that goes back almost 4 billion years. So it's generally, that's a desperate measure, the incompleteness argument. The thing it has going for it is that you can always make it because it's inherently unfalsifiable, but it's by no means the only position that's out there among the paleontologists.
Phil completely misunderstands modern paleontology on this point. There is no paleontologist I know of who argues that there is a continuous record of paleontological history. That's utter and complete nonsense. There are no paleontologists who make that argument. What he's saying is that the fossil record has been hypothesized to be better than evolutionists thought it might be 20 years ago. And there's a case to be made for that. But in no way are those evolutionists arguing that there's somehow a complete fossil record and we're seeing all of it and therefore creationism is true. That is false.
Happy to find that there will always be a place for ethics and moderating debates between Darwinists and theists. Something for Professor Johnson.
Yeah, actually I have just a simple numbers question, but first I just have to clarify your position, Professor Johnson. You're 13,000-year creationist, is this, or?
No, I don't speak to such issues. It's been my I don't bring biblical issues into the discussion at all, and I don't have any particular personal position about the age questions. In my work, I assume the official age that's given, but I have not made an effort to make a personal study of radiometric dating, for example, or whatever. So I just leave that all alone. Whatever age you want is fine with me. Okay. Take as much time as you want. The mutation selection process didn't produce and couldn't have produced all these complex structures.
Okay, my question is then, actually, and I was hoping both of you might address it briefly. I happen to be one of the people in the middle category that you had when you were polling the audience. I find personally that the least leap of faith that required is to adopt a sort of middle ground because both extremes seem quite absurd to me. But my question is for both of you to speak to your impressions of, and also I qualify myself as a scientist as well, So I'm sort of in the middle of everything. And my question is, your impression of the entire scientific field, including biology, chemistry, paleontology, all of the sciences combined. What is your impression of the general trends, and do you think that these two extremes are tending to come to some sort of middle ground? And actually, as far as the numbers are concerned, do you have any estimates? Professor Provine, maybe you could just talk about biologists, but just in general, do you have any estimates of, say, the percentages of scientists that are inclined, to support your view or his view?
I'll take that, yes. Well, see, if you're in this kind of science, I mean, we're not talking about electrical engineering or whatever, but in the historical sciences, you're under tremendous pressure to be a metaphysical naturalist. When people ask me why a law professor would take up this issue, one reason is that you can't really do it. You can't challenge the fundamental philosophical assumptions within evolutionary biology, or you won't be in evolutionary biology for very long. It's not a tolerant world. So that's one answer I'd give. Now, a second one, I think it's a matter of moving to an understanding of what science is. Darwinian science is based on a 19th century positivism and a notion that the objective way to understand life, to understand anything, was in terms of these purposeless material processes. What came along with this is the idea that science is a value-free enterprise of finding fact. And although nobody at the studies of philosophy of science at a sophisticated level thinks that anymore, it's really the version that's promulgated to the general public very heavily. And in fact, some of the scientists themselves tend to believe that. I remember a debate that I had at the University of Texas with Steven Weinberg, the physicist and Nobel Prize winner, who discussed me critically, but not all that disrespectfully, in his book Dreams of a Final Theory. And Weinberg told me, he says, well, the thing is that we scientific materialists, like I myself, Steven Weinberg, aren't like you Christian theists. We have the courage to see reality as it is, whereas you just believe what you want to believe. So, to which I said, well, Professor Weinberg, you are a reductionist, in science. That's your philosophy, which means you're a materialist reductionist, which means that everything reduces to fundamental particles, which means that you are the king of knowledge. Don't you have a powerful incentive to believe this, because it gives you this great position of power in the priesthood? And of course that's the case. And one of the things I think that people are going to be learning in the coming century at the popular level, it's already known at the philosophy of science level, is that a tremendous amount of ideology and worldview and cultural preference and so on goes into science. That's what I'm telling you. That's why the evolutionary biologists found it so easy to believe that the peppered moth example showed that natural selection could make new things, could make moths and trees and scientific observers. It's because their guard was down, because it suited their preference. And we find this in all kinds of areas, including, by the way, religion and law.
I've got to say something about this 19th century reductionistic materialism that I've got. At least my view isn't swallowed hook, line, and sinker from a tradition that's 2,000 years old. Let me respond to your question, because I think you've said something, you've asked an important question. The question is whether you can be a compatibilist between religion and modern science. That's a really good question. In the evolution course I teach, there's quite a large contingent of compatibilists, much bigger than the contingent of compatibilists in this audience. By the end of the term, they have almost disappeared. Some of them become creationists. I'm glad to see that happen, because it shows they've really listened to what's going on in the class, see the implications of evolution, and say, I want no part of that. And they become creationists. A much larger group of them look at the contrast between naturalism and supernaturalism and decide they want to be naturalists. And they switch over to being naturalists.
Well, you have to be one or the other.
So what I'm trying to say is that during the course, people who believe like you do get fewer and fewer and fewer.
I see. How about among scientists? Is that also true?
I've had a terrible time at Cornell finding an evolutionary theist, a theistic evolutionist. I want to find one to represent that point of view. I've gone to evolutionists who go to church with their families and ask them, would you please come to my class and represent your point of view in my class? And the response invariably has been, oh, well, I don't really believe any of that stuff.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I am going to step outside of the role of moderator, if I may, sinning against it, and because I really would like to ask Professor Provine how you understand the divergence in your class towards creationism or evolutionism if there's no free will. Are we all necessitated by your lecture?
I knew 99% of this group would believe in free will. The catch is, and it's a very simple catch, making decisions does not guarantee the existence of free will. Even computers can be programmed to make decisions as human beings, or in a much more complex way, programmed to make decisions. So the mere decision-making process does not by itself guarantee the existence of free will. So to my mind, this is the kind of issue you might really think a little bit more about, whether you indeed have free will, whether your sense of freedom when you're making decisions is a real, genuine, and deep freedom, or whether, in fact, your decision is constrained so much by all the things in your background and the set of circumstances you face that indeed another person who knows you well might very well be able to predict your decision. The reason why they can do that is that you are a person who's got deterministic influences in your background. You are a certain person. You face certain circumstances. And so, of course, someone who knows you can predict what kind of decision you're likely to make. All I'm doing is throwing that issue up for you to think about. I don't expect everybody to accept it tonight.
Of course, predictability, though, doesn't translate to necessitation. Right.
But nor do decisions lead to the existence of free will.
Professor Johnson, I just got a quick question. I was hoping you could provide a little clarity. Professor Provine mentioned a couple of times he harped on the Hawaiian fruit fly and seemed to concur that, or seemed to state that you even stated that there was evolution taking place there. And I was just wondering if you could clarify that.
You know, to tell you the truth, I don't really know exactly what I think about the Hawaiian fruit fly. It is claimed to be an example of the kind of evolution, which I'm sure does exist in various cases. That is to say, where you get a migration of something into an island environment, and it then inbreeds and so on, and it changes. And my point is, I am not concerned, really, to deny that that sort of thing could happen. And it may have in that case, but I don't really know enough about it to have a firm opinion, even about exactly how you know that they're separate species, because that's a difficult line to draw in many cases. So I'm not taking a position about that, and I'm not exactly sure what the boundaries of microevolution are. What I am, the thing that I'm concerned with is how much does it explain? And my position is one which I say has quite a respectable tradition in biology. It's been taken by many of the most eminent people, and I think the ones who are most willing to go against fashion. And it's that while there is a minor variability, or sometimes actually more than minor, which is possible within the pre-existing type, it doesn't tell you how you get plants and animals, or it doesn't tell you how you get fruit flies in the first place.
But I think it does tell you something important about Philip Johnson's position. As I argued tonight, and as you could easily ascertain, the genetic differences, the genetic distance between early and late species of Hawaiian Drosophila give them far greater morphological and genetic differences than exist between humans and chimpanzees. It's of no consequence to Phil whether Hawaiian Drosophila evolved naturalistically or not. He obviously doesn't really care about Hawaiian Drosophila. He does care about humans. So just the fact that humans are much more closely related...
I talk all about organisms, Will, not just humans.
Pardon?
My position, you're the one that keeps bringing up the human thing. That's your obsession.
I bring up humans because you claim that humans do not share a common ancestor with chimpanzees, and so there was an act of special creation. And that's because he cares about humans. If he were coming from outer space with the same view he has now, he wouldn't care about the evolution between humans and chimpanzees any more than he would with Hawaiian Drosophila, because they wouldn't be special. He'd have been created by some god on the other planet.
I started with the Cambrian explosion, but and with the origin of life, with the origin of complexity, with the problem of new genetic information. And although that's a friendlier version, it's still an ad hominem argument. Well,
thank you very much for your questions, for being here, and I especially want to thank our speakers.
Mr. Moderator?
You were terrific.
Yes, I do think that a good deal of heat and light was cast up tonight, and the best kind, and thank you again.